Ma'am, you called us to arrest a what? That's what the police officer said when Eleanor Morrison, our neighborhood HOA dictator, called 911 to have my wife arrested the day she returned from duty. Eleanor had spent months terrorizing everyone in our perfect suburban neighborhood, fining people for having the wrong mailbox color, and measuring grass height with actual rulers. She thought my wife would be another easy victim to control and intimidate. So when my wife wouldn't bow down to her petty power trip, Eleanor made the call that would destroy her entire world. She had no idea who she'd just declared war against, and what happened next became legendary neighborhood justice. Comment where you're watching this epic takedown unfold. Let me back up 3 months. My wife Sarah had been away on a federal assignment chasing dangerous criminals across 4 states. That left me alone in Willowbrook Heights, what I like to call our picture-perfect neighborhood. You know the type: manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and homeowners who actually read their HOA bylaws for fun. At the center of this suburban paradise sat Eleanor Morrison, our neighborhood association president, ruling her kingdom with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. Eleanor wasn't just your average HOA president. She was the type of woman who measured grass height with a ruler and kept a detailed spreadsheet of every violation she'd ever documented. In her late 50s, widowed for nearly a decade, she'd turned neighborhood control into her life's work. Every morning, at exactly 7:30, she'd emerge from her pristine colonial house for her inspection walk, clipboard in hand, noting everything from slightly overgrown hedges to trash cans left out 5 minutes past pickup time. The woman had turned being a busybody into an art form. During Sarah's absence, I'd managed to stay under Eleanor's radar. I kept my lawn, trimmed my trash cans properly positioned, and my music at reasonable volumes. I thought I was being a model neighbor. What I didn't realize was that Eleanor had been watching, waiting, looking for any excuse to establish dominance over the new guy who dared to work from home as a freelance graphic designer. In her mind, anyone who didn't leave for a traditional office job every morning was automatically suspicious. The incident happened on a Saturday afternoon in late September. Sarah was finally coming home after 3 months of tracking fugitives, and I wanted everything perfect for her return. I'd spent the morning pressure washing our driveway, the satisfying sound of high-pressure water blasting away months of accumulated grime. The concrete looked brand new when I finished. Then I decided to plant 6 lavender bushes along our front walkway, Sarah's favorite flower, and a welcome home surprise she'd see the moment she pulled into our driveway. I was on my knees digging the last hole for the final lavender plant when I heard the sharp click of high heels on pavement. Eleanor was marching across her lawn toward me, her face set in that particular expression of righteous anger she'd perfected over years of HOA enforcement. She carried her ever-present clipboard and what looked like a professional camera, the kind serious photographers use. "Stop what you're doing right now," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been told no. "You are in violation of at least 3 neighborhood ordinances." I looked up from my gardening, genuinely confused. "Good afternoon, Eleanor. I'm just planting some flowers for my wife's homecoming." She began snapping photos of me, the pressure washer, and the innocent lavender plants like she was documenting a crime scene. Noise violations during weekend quiet hours, unauthorized landscaping modifications, and excessive water usage during municipal restrictions. She rattled off, making notes on her clipboard between photos. The rules clearly state that any landscaping changes require prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee. I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "Eleanor, it's 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, and I'm planting flowers on my own property. I wasn't aware that beautifying my home required a committee meeting." Her smile was ice cold as she clicked one final photo. "Ignorance of the rules isn't an excuse, Leo. You'll be hearing from the association very soon." She turned on her heel and marched back to her house, leaving me standing there with dirt under my fingernails and a growing sense of unease. Something about her demeanor told me this wasn't over. It was just beginning. Exactly 1 hour later, my phone chimed with an email notification. The subject line read, "Official violation notice. Immediate payment required. $400. $400 for planting flowers and cleaning my own driveway." The email was professionally formatted, complete with time-stamped photos and references to specific HOA bylaws I'd apparently violated. But something nagged at me as I read through the details. The timestamp on the penalty showed it had been issued the previous week, 6 days before I'd even started my weekend projects. I stared at my computer screen, reading the date over and over again. September 15th. Today was September 21st. Eleanor had backdated this penalty, creating evidence of violations that hadn't even occurred yet. She'd planned this trap before I'd even picked up the pressure washer. This wasn't about neighborhood standards or rule enforcement. This was about power and control. Eleanor Morrison had just declared war on me, and she'd fired the first shot with a lie. Sitting in my home office surrounded by design projects and client deadlines, I felt something shift inside me. I'd spent 15 years building my freelance career dealing with demanding clients and impossible deadlines. I'd learned patience diplomacy and how to handle difficult people. But Eleanor had just crossed a line I didn't even know existed. She didn't want compliance with her rules. She wanted complete submission to her authority. If Eleanor could fake the dates on this penalty, what else was she planning that I didn't know about? Type trapped. If you've ever dealt with someone who plays dirty like this. I spent that entire night researching our HOA bylaws, complaint procedures, and enforcement history like I was preparing for a final exam. What I discovered was both enlightening and infuriating. Eleanor Morrison had turned selective enforcement into a fine art targeting specific residents while ignoring identical violations committed by her allies. Mrs. Henderson, 2 doors down, had been running an unlicensed daycare for 6 months without a single complaint, while the young couple across the street had been fined 3 times for leaving their garbage cans visible from the street for more than 4 hours after pickup. I spent hours documenting Eleanor's pattern of harassment disguised as legitimate governance. Photo evidence showed her friends parking RVs in their driveways for weeks at a time, a clear violation according to Section 4.3 of our community guidelines. While she had fined the Martinez family $50 for leaving their boat trailer parked for a single weekend. The more I dug, the clearer it became that Eleanor didn't enforce rules. She weaponized them against anyone who threatened her absolute authority over our little suburban kingdom. Armed with evidence and fueled by righteous anger, I crafted what I considered a masterpiece of professional passive aggression. My email to all 47 neighborhood residents had the subject line, "Community question our rules applied fairly." I presented my research with the clinical precision of a legal brief, including side-by-side photo comparisons, showing identical violations treated completely differently, depending on who committed them. The centerpiece was Eleanor's backdated penalty, complete with metadata screenshots, proving the document had been created 6 days before the alleged violations occurred. The response was immediate and explosive. My phone started ringing within minutes of hitting send. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to before were calling to share their own Eleanor horror stories. The retired teacher next door told me about being fined for having her newspaper delivered to her front door instead of the designated delivery area. The young father 3 houses down had been cited for children's toys being visible in his backyard from a second-story window. Eleanor's reign of petty tyranny had touched nearly every household in our neighborhood, but nobody had ever organized the evidence before. Within 6 hours, my email had been forwarded to local community groups and shared across our township's online forums. Eleanor's carefully constructed image as a fair and impartial neighborhood guardian crumbled under the weight of documented evidence. Phone calls buzzed between houses as neighbors shared stories they'd kept quiet for years, afraid of becoming Eleanor's next target. The woman who'd controlled our community through fear and intimidation suddenly found herself exposed as a small-time dictator drunk on the minimal power of a voluntary position. Eleanor was forced to send a public apology email to our entire community by noon the next day. The message was a masterclass in non-apology, apologizing filled with phrases like procedural error and misunderstanding of documentation protocols. She canceled my $400 fine with all the grace of someone swallowing broken glass. But her follow-up email sent privately to my personal address contained just 3 words that made my blood run cold. "You won today." Those 3 words carried more menace than any shouted threat could have achieved. Eleanor Morrison wasn't the type of person who accepted defeat gracefully. This wasn't over. It was escalation. I'd just humiliated her in front of the entire community she'd controlled for years, and wounded animals are always the most dangerous. For the next week, Eleanor made herself visible in ways that felt deliberately intimidating. Every evening around 6 o'clock, she'd appear on the sidewalk outside my house phone, pressed to her ear, taking detailed notes while pointing at my property and measuring distances with a contractor's tape measure. She wasn't trying to hide her surveillance. She wanted me to know I was being watched, cataloged, and prepared for something bigger than a simple HOA violation. The expensive black sedan with government license plates appeared on a Tuesday morning. I was working in my home office when movement outside caught my attention. The car was parked directly in front of Eleanor's house, and a well-dressed young man in an expensive suit was embracing her on her front porch. Their body language suggested familiarity. This wasn't a casual acquaintance or business associate. The license plate frame read, City of Willowbrook Official Vehicle, and something about the way Eleanor gestured toward my house during their conversation made my stomach drop. The man looked to be in his early 30s, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to wielding authority. He carried himself like government officials do, that particular combination of self-importance and bureaucratic power that comes from having actual influence over people's lives. Eleanor handed him what appeared to be a thick folder, pointing repeatedly in my direction while they spoke. Their conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes, and when it ended, Eleanor's smile held the cold satisfaction of someone who'd just loaded a gun. After the government car pulled away, Eleanor stood on her porch for several more minutes, staring directly at my house with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger or frustration, it was the look of someone who knew exactly what was coming next, and was savoring the anticipation. She waved at me when she noticed me watching from my window, a gesture so friendly and normal that it felt like a threat. That night, I found myself checking our home security system twice before bed. Sarah had installed it before leaving for her assignment, joking that I needed protection from suburban dangers like overzealous salespeople and aggressive HOA presidents. At the time, I'd laughed at her federal agent paranoia. Now I was grateful for her professional suspicions about the world. I tried calling Sarah to tell her about Eleanor's escalating behavior, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Her assignments often required communication blackouts, and I didn't want to worry her with neighborhood drama when she was dealing with actual dangerous criminals. I'd handled the first round successfully. I could manage whatever Eleanor had planned next. Who was this mystery man, and why did seeing him with Eleanor make my blood run cold? Comment if you think Leo should have seen this coming. Sarah came home on a Thursday evening, slipping into our driveway so quietly I didn't hear her government vehicle until she was already parked. 3 months of hunting fugitives across state lines had left subtle changes in her appearance. Her posture was more alert, her eyes constantly scanning surroundings, and she moved with the controlled precision of someone who'd spent months expecting danger around every corner. When she hugged me in our kitchen, I could feel the weight of her service weapon and the tension in her shoulders that came from months of high-stakes federal law enforcement. What happened while I was gone? She asked, her voice carrying that particular tone federal agents use when they sense something isn't right. Sarah had always been perceptive, but 3 months of tracking dangerous criminals had sharpened her instincts to a razor's edge. I tried to downplay the Eleanor situation, not wanting to burden her with suburban drama after what she'd been through, but Sarah listened with the focused attention she reserved for case briefings. Her questions were precise and professional, timeline escalation pattern and Eleanor's behavioral changes, like she was building a threat assessment. Leo, this isn't random neighbor drama, she said after I finished explaining. This is a calculated power play by someone who's used to getting her way through intimidation. The fact that she had a government contact ready to deploy suggests this was planned well in advance. Sarah's years in federal law enforcement had taught her to recognize predatory behavior patterns, and something about Eleanor's tactics had triggered her professional alarm system. People like Eleanor don't stop escalating until they encounter someone with more power than they have. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear, perfect weather for the garden work Sarah had missed during her absence. She'd changed into casual clothes, jeans, sneakers, and a light jacket, but I noticed she still wore her credential wallet on her belt out of habit. We were watering the lavender plants that had started this whole mess when Eleanor appeared like a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. She marched across her perfectly manicured lawn, carrying a thick manila folder, her face set in an expression of righteous determination that suggested she'd been planning this confrontation for days. I specifically told your husband about our neighborhood rules and standards, Eleanor announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. Her folder was stuffed with what appeared to be official documents, photos, and forms, the artillery for whatever battle she'd come to wage. This is a community of homeowners who respect property values and maintain appropriate standards of conduct. Sarah straightened slowly, her demeanor shifting in ways that would have been subtle to anyone who didn't know her professionally. Her voice remained perfectly calm and measured when she responded. Good morning, we're tending our garden. Eleanor's frustration mounted as Sarah refused to be intimidated by her official folder and authoritative tone. You people think the rules don't apply to you, she snapped, her carefully maintained facade of neighborly concern, cracking to reveal the controlling personality underneath. "I've been documenting everything, and I have the authority to ensure compliance in this neighborhood. We have standards here." Her voice rose with each word, that particular escalation pattern of someone who had never encountered resistance to their authority. "You think you're above the law? I'm calling the police right now." Sarah's response was delivered with the kind of calm that comes from years of dealing with actual criminals. "Go ahead and call them." There was something in her tone, not challenging or aggressive, but absolutely unshakable, that should have warned Eleanor she was making a catastrophic mistake. Instead, Eleanor pulled out her phone with the triumphant expression of someone playing what she believed was a winning card. "Yes, I need police immediately," she said into her phone, her voice shaking with adrenaline and righteous anger. "There's a woman with a fake federal badge threatening residents in my neighborhood." The moment Eleanor mentioned a fake badge, Sarah's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Her movements became deliberate and controlled as she slowly opened her casual jacket, revealing the credential wallet she wore out of professional habit. The federal law enforcement badge caught the morning sunlight, its metal surface reflecting with the unmistakable authenticity of real government authority. When Sarah spoke again, her voice had dropped to the ice-cold tone she used for official business. "Which police exactly are you calling?" Eleanor's face transformed from righteous anger to complete shock in the space of a heartbeat. The phone shook in her hands as the reality of her mistake hit her like a physical blow. She'd just called the police to report a federal law enforcement officer for impersonating a federal law enforcement officer. The irony was so complete, it would have been funny if Eleanor hadn't looked like she was about to faint from mortification. "Ma'am, you called about someone with a fake badge." The dispatcher's voice carried clearly through Eleanor's phone, still pressed to her ear despite her obvious shock. Eleanor's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words emerged. She was experiencing the unique horror of realizing she'd just made the most embarrassing mistake of her life in front of an audience. "Ma'am, are you still there? Do you need medical assistance?" The dispatcher continued, probably wondering why the caller had suddenly gone silent. Eleanor ended the call without responding, but the damage was already done. 2 patrol cars arrived within minutes, their occupants stepping out with the professional alertness of officers responding to a potential federal impersonation case. The younger officer's face lit up with recognition the moment he saw Sarah. "Sarah, what are you doing here? I thought you were still on that multi-state fugitive operation." The easy familiarity in his voice made it clear they'd worked together before. The older sergeant approached Eleanor with the patient expression of someone who'd seen every possible type of civilian complaint. "Ma'am, you called to report someone with a fake federal badge." Eleanor stood frozen as the officers explained to her that she'd just tried to have a deputy U.S. Marshal arrested for being a deputy U.S. Marshal. The sergeant's voice carried the kind of professional restraint that comes from years of dealing with embarrassing civilian mistakes. "This is Sarah Rodriguez, 8-year veteran of the Federal Service, just returned from a major fugitive recovery operation." Eleanor's humiliation was complete and public. Neighbors had emerged from their houses to watch the police response, and every one of them witnessed her total defeat. The police cars pulled away, leaving Eleanor standing alone on her lawn, while neighbors whispered and pointed from their porches and driveways. For the first time since I'd known her, Eleanor Morrison looked powerless. She'd just called the police on a police officer, but why did her final look tell me this humiliation would only make her more dangerous? Comment karma if you think Eleanor got what she deserved. Eleanor disappeared for exactly 2 weeks. Not physically. Her house lights came on at their usual times, her newspaper disappeared from her driveway each morning, and her car moved occasionally. But the woman who had made controlling our neighborhood her full-time job became completely invisible. No morning inspection, walks, no clipboard appearances, no official emails about violation procedures. The silence felt ominous, like the calm before a storm that meteorologists warn you to take seriously. During those 2 weeks of Eleanor's apparent retreat, strange things began happening. Anonymous complaints started appearing in the township's official records. Noise violations reported at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when I was having normal phone conversations with clients, mysterious, suspicious odors, allegedly emanating from our backyard where Sarah had planted herb gardens, and reports of unusual traffic patterns because delivery trucks occasionally used our driveways to turn around. Each complaint was filed through proper municipal channels, creating an official paper trail of harassment disguised as legitimate civic reporting. Sarah recognized the pattern immediately. Someone's building a case, she told me one evening, reviewing the complaint records I'd obtained through public information requests. This is professional retaliation tactics. Create enough official documentation to justify larger action later. Whoever's behind this has experience with bureaucratic warfare. Her federal training had taught her to recognize systematic harassment campaigns, and Eleanor's sudden shift from direct confrontation to anonymous official complaints suggested she'd found a new strategy, or a new ally with experience in governmental pressure tactics. The official letter arrived on a Wednesday morning, delivered by certified mail in an envelope bearing the seal of our city government. The return address read, Office of Business Licensing and Municipal Compliance, and something about the formal weight of the envelope made my hands shake as I signed for it. Inside was a document that would have destroyed my life if I had been guilty of what it alleged: notice of investigation, alleged illegal home business operation in residential zone. The accusations were detailed and devastating. According to the letter, multiple complaints had triggered an official investigation into my alleged operation of an unlicensed commercial enterprise in violation of residential zoning laws. The document outlined potential penalties that made my blood run cold: a $25,000 fine, immediate cease and desist orders, and a complete 3-year prohibition from operating any home-based business in our township. My entire career, 15 years of building client relationships and professional reputation, hanging in the balance because of what appeared to be legitimate government oversight. I spread the documents across our kitchen table, my hands shaking, as I calculated the financial devastation these penalties would cause. Our mortgage, business insurance, equipment, leases, and ongoing client contracts, everything depended on my ability to work from home. "We'll lose the house, Sarah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, as the reality sank in. 15 years building this business, and it could all be gone in 30 days. The investigation timeline was ruthlessly efficient: 30 days to provide complete documentation, proving my innocence, or face immediate enforcement action. The emotional breakdown hit me like a physical blow. I should never have fought back against Eleanor, I said, burying my face in my hands as guilt and fear overwhelmed my ability to think clearly. Maybe I should have just paid the $400 fine and kept quiet. Maybe I brought this on myself by challenging someone who obviously had more power than I realized. Self-doubt flooded through me as I questioned every decision I'd made. Choosing to work from home, moving to this neighborhood, standing up to Eleanor's initial harassment. Sarah found me completely defeated, staring at the government documents spread across our table like evidence of my own stupidity. But instead of the sympathy I expected, her response was immediate and professional. "Leo, look at me. They made a critical mistake. They left evidence everywhere." Her federal law enforcement training had kicked in the moment she saw the official letter, and her voice carried the confidence of someone who'd built a career hunting people who thought government power made them untouchable. "This is exactly what I do for a living," Sarah continued, her calm certainty cutting through my panic like a lifeline. "I hunt criminals who think badges and official positions put them above the law. The people behind this investigation made the amateur mistake of creating a documented conspiracy." She was already mentally organizing an investigation strategy, her professional instincts taking over, as she recognized the hallmarks of corruption and abuse of power. Sarah's quiet, steely determination filled our kitchen as she began outlining our response plan. "They picked the wrong family to target," she said, her voice carrying the kind of resolve that comes from years of tracking dangerous fugitives who thought they were too smart to get caught. "We're going to find every piece of evidence they left behind, and then we're going to watch them destroy themselves with their own arrogance." For the first time since opening that government letter, I felt hope beginning to replace panic. Eleanor Morrison had found someone with government power to weaponize against us, but she'd made one critical miscalculation. She'd chosen to target a federal law enforcement officer's family, and federal agents don't lose personal battles. They turn them into federal cases. Eleanor had found someone with government power to destroy us, but did she realize she'd just made it personal with someone who hunts corrupt officials for a living? Type, fight back if you think Maya and Leo should take them down. The next 2 weeks passed in an eerie calm that reminded me of those nature documentaries where predators stalk their prey just outside camera range. Eleanor remained completely invisible. No morning inspection walks, no clipboard appearances, no official emails about neighborhood violations. But the anonymous complaints continued appearing in township records with mechanical precision. Noise violations filed at 2 p.m. when I was having normal client phone calls, mysterious reports of suspicious odors from our backyard herb garden, and complaints about unusual traffic patterns because UPS occasionally used our driveway to turn around. Sarah recognized the sophisticated harassment pattern immediately. "Someone's building an official case file," she explained, reviewing the complaint records I'd obtained through public information requests. "This isn't random neighbor petty behavior anymore. This is systematic documentation designed to justify major governmental action. Whoever's coaching Eleanor through this process has serious experience with bureaucratic warfare and knows exactly how to weaponize municipal systems against private citizens." Her federal training had taught her to identify organized campaigns of official harassment, and the sudden shift from Eleanor's direct confrontation style to anonymous bureaucratic attacks suggested she'd found herself a very dangerous ally. The official envelope arrived on a Wednesday morning like a bomb disguised as routine mail. The return address bore the official seal of our city government, Office of Business, Licensing, and Municipal Compliance. My hands actually shook as I signed for the certified delivery, some primitive instinct warning me that whatever was inside this envelope had the power to destroy everything I'd built over 15 years of freelance work. The weight of the paper felt ominous, like holding documentation of my own professional execution. Inside was a document that would have ended my career if I'd been guilty of the allegations. Notice of investigation, alleged illegal home business operation in violation of residential zoning ordinances. The accusations were detailed, comprehensive, and devastating. According to multiple anonymous complaints filed over recent weeks, I was allegedly operating an unlicensed commercial enterprise that violated every relevant municipal code governing residential neighborhoods. The document outlined potential penalties that made my vision blur: a $25,000 fine for each violation, immediate cease and desist orders that would shut down my business within 72 hours, and a complete 3-year prohibition from operating any home-based business anywhere in our township. I spread the investigation documents across our kitchen table, my calculator app working overtime, as I tried to comprehend the financial devastation these penalties would cause. Mortgage payments, business insurance, premiums, equipment, leases, and ongoing client contracts. My entire livelihood depended on my ability to work from home as a licensed graphic designer. The investigation timeline was ruthlessly efficient: 30 days to provide complete documentation, proving my business was legally compliant, or face immediate enforcement action that would destroy everything Sarah and I had worked to build. "We'll lose the house, Sarah," I whispered, staring at numbers that didn't add up to survival. 15 years building this business, establishing client relationships, creating a reputation in my field, and it could all disappear in 1 month. The weight of potential financial ruin pressed down on my chest like a physical force. Even if we eventually prove my innocence, the investigation process alone will destroy my client relationships. Who wants to work with a graphic designer under government investigation for operating an illegal business? The emotional breakdown hit me like a dam bursting. I pushed my laptop off the kitchen table, not caring when it clattered to the floor, and buried my face in my hands as 15 years of professional pride crumbled into dust. "I should never have fought back against Eleanor," I said, my voice breaking with guilt and terror. "I should have just paid her stupid $400 fine and kept my head down like everyone else in this neighborhood. Maybe I brought this destruction on myself by challenging someone who obviously had connections I never suspected." Self-doubt flooded through me as I questioned every decision that had led to this moment. Moving to Willowbrook Heights, choosing to work from home, standing up to Eleanor's initial harassment, instead of just accepting it like a normal person would have done. What kind of idiot picks a fight with someone who can weaponize the entire city government? I asked Sarah, feeling like the biggest fool who'd ever lived. "I'm a graphic designer, not a lawyer or politician. I design logos and websites, and now I'm facing a federal-level investigation because I couldn't just mind my own business." Sarah found me completely defeated, staring at government documents spread across our table, like evidence of my own stupidity and arrogance. But instead of the sympathy I expected, her response was immediate and coldly professional. "Leo, listen to me very carefully. They made a critical mistake. They left evidence everywhere." Her federal law enforcement training had activated the moment she saw the official investigation letter, and her voice carried the confidence of someone who'd spent years building cases against people who thought government positions made them untouchable. "This is exactly what I do for a living. Sarah continued, her calm certainty cutting through my panic big like a rescue rope thrown to a drowning man. I hunt criminals who abuse official power to settle personal scores. I track fugitives who think badges and government connections put them above the law they're supposed to enforce. The people behind this investigation just made the amateur mistake of creating a documented conspiracy that any first-year law student could prosecute successfully. Sarah was already shifting into federal agent mode, her trained mind organizing investigation strategies and evidence collection protocols. They picked the wrong family to target, she said, her voice carrying the kind of steely resolve that comes from years of pursuing dangerous criminals who considered themselves too smart to be caught. Eleanor Morrison, and whoever's helping her, just declared war on a federal law enforcement officer's family, and that's the kind of mistake that ends careers and sometimes freedom. For the first time since opening that devastating government letter, I felt hope beginning to replace the crushing weight of panic and despair. Sarah's professional confidence was infectious, and I began to remember that my wife didn't just carry a federal badge. She was genuinely good at her job. She'd spent 3 months tracking fugitives across 4 states and brought them all back to face justice. Eleanor Morrison and her government ally were about to discover they'd picked a fight with someone who specialized in taking down people exactly like them. We're going to find every piece of evidence they left behind. Sarah promised, her expression hardening into the look she wore when building cases against career criminals. Then we're going to watch them destroy themselves with their own arrogance and overconfidence. People who abuse government power always make the same mistake. They assume their authority makes them invincible, and that assumption becomes their downfall. Eleanor had found someone with government power to destroy us, but did she realize she'd just made it personal with someone who hunts corrupt officials for a living? Type, fight back if you think Sarah and Leo should take them down. Sarah guided me through the process of legal information gathering with the systematic precision of someone who'd built a career on following evidence trails. We start with the investigation letter itself, she explained, spreading the documents across our dining room table like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be solved. Government investigations leave paper trails at every level, and the people behind this harassment campaign just handed us a roadmap to their own conspiracy. In her years of federal training had taught her that criminals always document their own crimes, especially when they think official positions protect them from consequences. The first breakthrough came within hours of starting our research. The investigation letter was signed by Chad Morrison, senior city planning specialist, and that last name triggered immediate suspicion. A simple online search confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. Chad Morrison was Eleanor Morrison's nephew, a 33-year-old city employee who'd been promoted to senior planning specialist just 8 months earlier. His government position gave him significant authority over business licensing and zoning enforcement throughout our township, making him the perfect inside ally for Eleanor's revenge campaign against the neighbor who'd humiliated her. Chad's professional online presence painted a picture of someone who'd never learned to separate personal relationships from official responsibilities. His city employee profile boasted about helping families maintain neighborhood standards through proper municipal oversight, and his recent promotion had clearly gone to his head. The timing of his advancement within city government aligned perfectly with Eleanor's escalating harassment campaign, suggesting she'd been planning this nuclear option for months before our initial confrontation over the lavender plants. Sarah's systematic approach to digital investigation reminded me why federal agents are so effective at taking down organized crime. We're looking for patterns of communication coordination, and most importantly, any evidence that they documented their conspiracy. She explained, her laptop screen filled with public records, employment histories, and social media profiles. Amateurs always make the mistake of bragging about their schemes, especially when they think they're untouchable. And her fingers moved across the keyboard with the efficiency of someone who'd conducted hundreds of similar investigations. The smoking gun appeared during our 3rd day of research, hidden in plain sight on a city employee form that Chad apparently thought was private. Using my graphic design skills to trace digital breadcrumbs, I discovered a series of posts from an account called GovWorker92 that matched Chad's posting patterns, writing style, and timeline perfectly. The profile picture was a generic city skyline image, but reverse image searching revealed it came from a stock photography collection I'd designed 3 years earlier for a municipal website project. Chad had used my own artistic work to hide his identity while bragging about destroying my career. The irony was so perfect it felt like justice writing itself. His anonymous posts were a masterclass in government corruption, with detailed explanations of how one well-placed complaint form can destroy any freelancer's livelihood, and boastful descriptions of helping family members solve neighbor problems through proper bureaucratic channels. The post that sealed his fate was dated 2 days before my investigation letter arrived. Just helped my aunt deal with an annoying neighbor who thought he was smarter than the system. One government investigation form equals destroyed business. Family connections are everything in municipal work. Sarah photographed every post with the methodical precision of someone building a federal case. "This is conspiracy to abuse government power for personal revenge," she said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of an agent who just solved a complex investigation. Chad Morrison just documented his own criminal activity in writing, complete with motive timeline and coordination with Eleanor. Any prosecutor in the country would love to have evidence this clear-cut. Her years of experience had taught her that the best criminals always defeat themselves through overconfidence and the need to boast about their cleverness. The evidence collection process revealed the full scope of Eleanor and Chad's conspiracy. Phone records showed dozens of calls between them during the weeks following my public exposure of Eleanor's HOA corruption. Municipal databases revealed that Chad had personally processed every anonymous complaint filed against our property, bypassing normal procedures that would have distributed such complaints among multiple city employees. The coordination was so obvious it would have been funny if the consequences weren't potentially devastating to my livelihood. Building our defense case required documenting 8 years of completely legal business operations. My tax records, business licenses, zoning permits, and client contracts painted a picture of scrupulous compliance with every relevant law and regulation. 0 complaints had ever been filed against my home-based business before Eleanor's revenge campaign began, and my business activities were clearly within the scope of permitted residential uses. Chad's investigation was built on fabricated evidence designed to support a predetermined conclusion, rather than genuine regulatory oversight. Sarah's strategy session felt like watching a master tactician prepare for battle. "Tomorrow we request a formal hearing with the City Council," she announced, organizing our evidence into presentation folders with the efficiency of someone who'd testified in federal court. "We're going to expose this entire conspiracy in front of the city officials who have the power to fire Chad and refer him for criminal prosecution. Eleanor Morrison and her corrupt nephew just handed us everything we need to destroy them publicly." The final piece of our case was the timeline evidence that proved premeditation beyond any reasonable doubt. Chad's bragging posts, Eleanor's harassment campaign, the coordinated filing of false complaints, and the investigation letter formed a perfect sequence of criminal conspiracy. They documented their own guilt so thoroughly that defending myself had become secondary to exposing their corruption for the entire city government to witness. We had undeniable proof of their conspiracy, but would it be enough to take down someone with government connections? Comment gotcha if you think Chad just sealed his own fate. The city council chamber felt like walking into a courtroom where I was simultaneously the defendant, prosecutor, and star witness in a case that would determine whether justice still existed in municipal government. Sarah and I arrived 30 minutes early with our attorney, a sharp municipal law specialist who'd reviewed our evidence and called it the most clear-cut case of government corruption I've seen in 20 years of practice. Our evidence was organized in presentation folders that felt heavy with the weight of justice waiting to be served. Each document a piece of the puzzle that would expose Eleanor and Chad's conspiracy to the very officials they'd tried to manipulate. Eleanor and Chad entered the chamber together, their confident body language and whispered strategy session making it clear they still believed their government connections made them untouchable. Chad carried himself with the self-assured bearing of someone who'd never faced real consequences for abusing his official position, while Eleanor maintained the imperious demeanor of someone accustomed to intimidating neighbors into submission. They chose seats at the front of the public gallery, positioning themselves like prosecutors rather than the defendants they were about to become. The chamber filled with familiar faces as our hearing drew an unexpectedly large audience. Word of our municipal corruption case had spread through local community groups, drawing residents from multiple neighborhoods who'd experienced similar harassment from overzealous HOA officials and corrupt city employees. The gallery buzzed with whispered conversations about Eleanor's documented pattern of abuse and speculation about how deep Chad's corruption extended throughout city government. This wasn't just about our personal battle anymore. It had become a public reckoning with systemic abuse of power. City council members took their seats with the formal gravity appropriate for addressing allegations of official misconduct. The council president, a distinguished woman in her 60s who'd served the community for over a decade, called the hearing to order with crisp authority. "We're here to address complaints regarding the investigation of Leo's home-based business and allegations of improper municipal procedures." She announced, her tone making it clear this wasn't routine municipal business, but a serious examination of potential corruption within their own government departments. Chad presented first his polished professional demeanor, clearly designed to impress city officials who controlled his career advancement. "Council members, this investigation represents exactly the kind of proactive zoning enforcement that protects residential property values and community standards." He began his presentation filled with official letterhead documents and bureaucratic language designed to obscure rather than illuminate. He presented fabricated neighbor complaints as legitimate community concerns, dismissed Leo's protests as typical freelancer attempts to circumvent proper licensing procedures, and confidently assured the council that his investigation followed all appropriate municipal protocols. The PowerPoint presentation Chad had prepared was masterfully manipulative, complete with zoning maps, regulatory citations, and carefully selected photographs that made my home-based graphic design work appear like major commercial activity, disrupting residential tranquility. His subtle arrogance became more apparent as he warmed to his subject, making comments about protecting hardworking families from inappropriate commercial encroachment and ensuring freelancers understand they can't simply ignore municipal oversight. Eleanor sat behind him, nodding approvingly, clearly believing their strategy was working perfectly. Our attorney's response was methodical and devastating. "Council members, Leo's documentation proves 8 years of completely legal business aspirations." She began presenting comprehensive evidence that destroyed Chad's accusations piece by piece. Business licenses, zoning permits, tax records, and client contracts painted a picture of scrupulous compliance with every relevant law and regulation. The municipal database showed 0 previous complaints filed against Leo's property before Eleanor's revenge campaign began, and his business activities clearly fell within permitted residential uses established by city zoning ordinances. The evidence presentation continued with surgical precision as our attorney systematically dismantled every element of Chad's investigation. Furthermore, the timing and coordination of complaints suggests this investigation was motivated by personal animus rather than legitimate regulatory oversight. She continued producing timeline documentation that revealed the obvious conspiracy between Eleanor and Chad. The council members' expression shifted from formal attention to genuine concern as the scope of corruption became apparent. When our attorney announced that the defense phase was complete and we were now presenting our own complaint against city officials, the atmosphere in the chamber changed dramatically. "Council members, we have evidence of conspiracy between HOA President Eleanor Morrison and Senior Planning Specialist Chad Morrison to abuse government power for personal revenge." She stated her words carrying the weight of documented truth that would change everything. The revelation that Eleanor and Chad were family members sent visible shockwaves through the council chamber. Mr. Morrison failed to disclose this relationship when processing complaints against Leo's property, a clear violation of municipal ethics codes requiring recusal from matters involving family members. Our attorney explained, producing employment records and family documentation that proved their connection. Council members exchanged concerned glances as they realized one of their own department heads had violated basic conflict of interest protocols. But the real explosion came when our attorney activated the large display screen and showed Chad's anonymous forum posts to the entire chamber. His bragging about destroying problem neighbors with one complaint form and boasting about family connections solving HOA disputes through municipal channels appeared in bold letters for everyone to read. The post, dated 2 days before my investigation letter, just helped my aunt deal with annoying neighbor who thought he was smarter than system, proved premeditation beyond any reasonable doubt. Chad's face went white as his own words condemned him in front of the very officials who controlled his government career. The irony of using my stock photography to hide his identity while bragging about destroying my business wasn't lost on anyone in the chamber. Council members stared at the evidence in stunned silence, clearly processing the implications of having a department head who documented his own corruption in writing. Eleanor sat frozen as the audience reaction built around her, whispered conversations and pointing fingers, making it clear her reputation was destroyed beyond repair. Other residents began standing and walking out of the chamber in disgust, their body language expressing communal rejection of someone who'd abused neighborhood authority for personal vendettas. Chad's case was crumbling, but would the city officials believe a freelancer over one of their own type truth if you're ready to see Chad get exposed? The silence in the city council chamber was deafening after our attorney finished presenting Chad's incriminating forum posts. Council members stared at the evidence on the large display screen with expressions ranging from shock to disgust, clearly processing the implications of having a senior city employee who had documented his own corruption with such brazen stupidity. Chad sat frozen in his chair, his earlier confidence completely evaporated, as his own words condemned him in front of the very officials who controlled his government career and pension. I stood to deliver my personal statement, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what was happening around us. Council members, this isn't about business permits or zoning violations. I began looking directly at each official as I spoke. This is about whether personal revenge can be disguised as legitimate government oversight and whether family connections can weaponize municipal departments against private citizens. The chamber was so quiet, I could hear the ventilation system humming as everyone waited to see how this confrontation would resolve. I've operated my graphic design business legally for 8 years without a single complaint until Eleanor Morrison decided I needed to be punished for challenging her HOA authority. I continued my words carrying the weight of documented truth that filled our evidence folders. When she couldn't destroy me through neighborhood association harassment, she recruited her nephew to abuse his government position for personal revenge. This isn't municipal oversight, it's corruption wearing the mask of legitimate authority. The council president's voice cut through the tension like a judicial gavel. Mr. Morrison, do you have any explanation for these forum posts that appear to show coordination with your aunt regarding official city business? Her tone made it clear this wasn't a routine procedural question, but an opportunity for Chad to explain why he shouldn't be immediately terminated and referred for criminal prosecution. Chad's mouth opened and closed several times as he searched for words that might somehow justify the unjustifiable. Those posts were taken out of context, Chad finally stammered, his professional composure completely shattered under the weight of undeniable evidence. Someone must have hacked my account or created fake posts to frame me for misconduct I didn't commit.